I thought I'd already found love with her, until the night her sister walked into the room, and everything I believed about my heart began to change. I used to think love had to be loud to be real, the kind that takes over your world in a rush, blinds you with its urgency, makes your heart race like it's running out of time. But with her, it was different. She was in her early 40s, graceful in ways I hadn't known to look for at my age, where I was quick, restless, always searching for the next thing. She carried herself with a steadiness that felt like home. I remember the first time we sat together in her living room, a quiet evening that didn't try to impress either of us. The lamp gave off a soft amber glow, throwing a warm haze across the walls. She laughed at something I said. Not a loud laugh, but one that seemed to start in her chest and roll gently upward, like it belonged to someone who had learned to find joy in the smallest things. I watched her tuck a strand of hair behind her ear as she leaned forward, her elbow brushing mine, her perfume soft and floral. That night, I told myself I had found love, because what else could this sense of peace be? We weren't dramatic together. She didn't demand constant attention, and I didn't feel the need to perform. It was simpler than that. Coffee at her kitchen table in the morning, the sound of the kettle filling the silence. Her hand reaching across to steady mine when I gestured too much telling a story. The way she listened, not nodding impatiently, not interrupting, just letting me speak as though my words carried weight. That's what pulled me in. The quietness of being with her, the calm certainty that I belonged. I would catch myself admiring her in ways I hadn't with women my age. There was something magnetic about her composure, the confidence of someone who had lived more life than me, who didn't stumble over the need to prove herself. When she looked at me, really looked at me, I felt not just seen but understood. And at 20-something, still fumbling to figure out who I was, that understanding felt intoxicating. I told myself, again and again, that this was love. That age didn't matter, that what we had was rare. I believed it when her fingers curled lightly over mine as we walked through the park. I believed it when she rested her head on my shoulder during late-night movies, her hair brushing against my cheek. I believed it in every unspoken exchange, every quiet smile that felt like a secret. Back then, my heart was steady, convinced. There was no doubt, no shadow, no hesitation. I thought I loved her, and I meant every word of it. But love has a way of surprising you. Sometimes it starts as a calm certainty, only to be tested by the kind of presence you never saw coming. It was supposed to be an ordinary evening. I'd come over to her place like I often did, carrying a bottle of wine, ready for the comfort of her company. She had invited me for dinner, nothing unusual, nothing that suggested the night would be any different from the dozens before it. But that's when the door opened, and I saw her sister for the first time. I don't know what I expected. Maybe someone who looked just like her, a mirror image. Instead, she was her own presence entirely. Slightly older, or maybe just carrying herself with a different kind of weight. Where the woman I thought I loved moved with practiced grace, her sister's energy felt less rehearsed, easier, freer. Like she didn't care if the world noticed her or not. And maybe that was what made it impossible not to notice. The first thing I caught was her eyes. They lingered on me a moment too long. Not in judgment, not in flirtation, but in a way that felt curious. Like she was trying to read me, measure me. I felt myself straighten unconsciously, aware of the space I was taking up, the sound of my own breathing. It was absurd. I was here for someone else. I already knew where my heart belonged, or at least I thought I did. Dinner began simply enough. The three of us at the table, passing plates back and forth, laughter rolling across conversations. She was different from her sister in the way she spoke, too more direct, less filtered. When she told a story, her hands moved with life, her voice dipping and rising with color. She teased her sister playfully, the way only siblings can, and the room felt warmer for it. I told myself I was just being polite, just being observant. But I couldn't ignore the little things. The way her hair fell slightly undone when she leaned forward, the small scar near her knuckle when she handed me the serving dish, the way her gaze met mine across the table as if she was testing whether I could hold it. At one point, she laughed at something I said, different from her sister's laugh, sharper, but just as genuine. And for the briefest moment, I felt something shift inside me. Not a thunderbolt, not a betrayal, just an awareness. The sense that there was a new layer to this evening I hadn't expected. One that unsettled the quiet certainty I'd carried with me. Later, when I stood to help clear the dishes, she brushed past me in the narrow hallway. Her shoulder touched mine lightly, nothing deliberate, nothing that couldn't be excused as accident. But it was enough to send a flicker through me, like the air had changed, like her presence carried a weight I hadn't been prepared to feel. I told myself it was nothing, that I was overthinking. But as I watched her laugh with her sister, something inside me whispered that nothing would be quite the same again. It didn't happen all at once. That would have been easier to recognize, easier to resist. Instead, it came in quiet moments, small details that seemed harmless on their own. But together, they began to unravel me. Her sister had a way of moving through a room that felt different. Not calculated, not deliberate, but unguarded. She didn't worry about how she was being seen, and maybe that was why I couldn't stop seeing her. When she entered, the air seemed to shift. Conversations tilted toward her, not because she demanded it, but because she carried an energy that drew people in without trying. And I hated to admit, even to myself, that I was one of them. It would be something as simple as the way she listened. Her sister, the woman I thought I loved, listened with kindness, with patience, as though she was protecting my words. But her sister listened with sharpness, with interest. When I spoke, she leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes locked on me like she was dissecting my thoughts. And when she responded, it wasn't always agreement. Sometimes she challenged me, teased me, nudged me in ways that left me thinking long after the conversation ended. I told myself it was just intellectual curiosity, nothing more. But then there were the accidental touches. The time she brushed past me in the kitchen to reach for a glass, her hand grazing my back, fingers trailing for just a second longer than necessary. Or the moment we stood side by side at the sink, her sleeve brushing against mine while the sound of running water filled the silence. Tiny sparks, impossible to ignore once you felt them. And yet the guilt was just as real. Every time her sister, the woman I was with, smiled at me with that easy, trusting warmth, I felt the sting of betrayal in my own thoughts. I'd hold her hand, feel her fingers intertwined with mine, and tell myself that was enough. That it should be enough. Because it was good. She was good to me, and I had sworn to myself that this was love. But then the quiet pull would return. Her sister's glance catching mine across the room. A shared joke no one else noticed. The way she tilted her head when she smiled at me, as though she knew something I didn't dare put into words. At night, when I was alone, I replayed these moments in my head, trying to convince myself they were meaningless. I told myself I was imagining it, projecting something that wasn't really there. And yet, the truth lingered in the silence. I felt it. I felt something every time she was near, something that unsettled me in ways I couldn't name. I had thought love was simple, that once you found it, you held on and never looked elsewhere. But now, in the smallest of moments, I was learning that the heart isn't always so loyal to certainty. Sometimes it shifts quietly, almost against your will. And mine was beginning to shift. It was late when the evening began to quiet down. The others had gone to bed, the clatter of dishes had been washed away, and the house seemed to settle into a hush that made every sound louder, every silence deeper. That was when I found myself alone with her sister. We hadn't planned it. I was sitting in the living room, the lamp throwing a dim amber circle across the carpet, when she came in with 2 glasses of water. She set one down in front of me. A simple gesture, yet something in the way her fingers lingered on the rim of the glass made me notice the space between us more than ever. At first, the conversation was casual. We talked about music, about the kind of books we liked, about the small details of our days. But the later it got, the less guarded her voice became. There was no performance in her words, no attempt to impress me. She spoke honestly, as though the quiet gave her permission to reveal more than she usually did. She told me about choices she wished she had made differently, the risks she hadn't taken, The dreams she'd set aside because life had demanded practicality. Her voice wavered slightly when she spoke about time. How quickly it moves, how it doesn't wait for anyone. I listened, more closely than I should have, feeling every word land inside me like it was meant for me alone. And then she looked at me, really looked. Not the polite acknowledgement of someone keeping a conversation alive, but the kind of gaze that seems to strip away everything you hide. My chest tightened. My throat dried. The air between us felt heavy, like it had thickened into something that wanted to pull us closer. I leaned forward without realizing it, elbows on my knees, my voice softer than I intended. I told her I understood, that I knew what it was like to feel behind, to feel like life was rushing past you before you'd figured out how to live it. Her eyes softened then, and I swear, for just a second, it felt like the rest of the world had disappeared. She reached out to emphasize something she was saying, her hand brushing lightly against my knee. Could have been nothing, an accidental touch, but it wasn't nothing to me. My pulse quickened, my breath caught. That single point of contact carried more weight than I wanted to admit. We didn't move closer, not really, but it felt as if we had. The silence after her hand slipped back to her lap was louder than the words we'd shared. I searched for something safe to say, something that would break the tension, but my thoughts were a blur. And in that silence, I realized, this wasn't harmless anymore. What lived between us now was dangerous, not because of what had happened, but because of everything we both knew could happen if we let it. It should have been easier to brush aside. Just a moment, just a passing current of air between two people who happened to sit too close, speak too softly. That's what I told myself after that night. But the truth was something had shifted, and once you feel it, you can't unfeel it. The days that followed were filled with small betrayals of my own heart. When I was with her, the woman I thought I loved, I found myself searching her features for the spark I'd felt in her sister's eyes. Her smile still warmed me. Her touch still comforted me. But somewhere inside, I noticed the difference. What had once felt bright and certain now carried a shadow. And then came the moment that broke whatever fragile wall I tried to build. It was another evening at her house. People gathered, laughter drifting from the kitchen, glasses clinking. I had stepped outside to catch a breath of air, the night cool against my skin. I thought I was alone, until the door opened and her sister stepped out too. She didn't say anything at first. She just stood beside me, the faint smell of her perfume mingling with the crisp night air. We looked at the sky, at nothing in particular, and yet the silence between us was louder than the noise inside. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than usual. She asked if I was happy, really happy, with her sister. The question struck like a chord I wasn't ready to hear. My answer stumbled, half-formed, caught between honesty and loyalty. And she knew it. I could see it in the way her eyes searched mine, steady and unflinching. The space between us seemed to shrink. Not physically, neither of us moved, but in the way our breaths began to match, in the way the night seemed to wrap around us like it was holding its breath too. Then it happened. Not a kiss, not something you could point to as proof of betrayal. Just her hand finding mine in the darkness. A light touch, tentative at first, as if asking permission. My heart slammed against my ribs, torn between pulling away and never letting go. I didn't move, couldn't. Her fingers slid against mine, slow, deliberate, and for one unbearable moment, we just stood there, hand in hand, saying nothing. The weight of it was crushing and liberating all at once. When she finally pulled away, the air rushed back in like a wave. She whispered, "We shouldn't," her voice trembling with a conviction that betrayed her own desire. And then she slipped inside, leaving me alone in the cold. I stood there for what felt like hours, my hands still burning where hers had been. The guilt came quickly, sharp and merciless. But underneath it, undeniable, was the truth I had tried so hard to bury. What I felt for her wasn't an accident, and it was no longer something I could ignore. The moment couldn't be postponed forever. Feelings have a way of finding cracks in even the strongest walls, slipping through until the truth is impossible to hide. For weeks I had carried the weight of silence, trying to convince myself that the night in the garden, her hand in mine, was just a mistake. Something fleeting, easily forgotten. But every glance, every unspoken pause, every heartbeat that quickened when she entered the room told me it was more than that. And finally, it all came to the surface. It was late again, the house dim and quiet, her sister already asleep upstairs. I found myself in the kitchen, pretending to look for something in the refrigerator just to keep my hands busy. And then she walked in. She didn't turn on the light. Only the soft hum of the fridge filled the silence as she leaned against the counter, arms folded, watching me. "Are you going to keep pretending?" she asked softly. Her voice wasn't accusing, but it cut straight through me. I froze. My throat tightened. Words stuck somewhere between denial and confession. I closed the fridge door, the faint click echoing too loudly in the small space, and faced her. "What do you mean?" My voice was rough, thin, like I already knew the answer but wanted her to say it first. She stepped closer, her eyes steady on mine. "You feel it too, don't you?" And there it was, the truth neither of us had dared to name. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. I tried to look away, but her gaze held me like gravity. I could have lied, could have shaken my head and walked away, but the weight of silence had grown unbearable. "Yes," I whispered. The word slipped out before I could stop it. My chest tightened as though admitting it had opened some locked door inside me. Her breath caught. She looked down, shaking her head with a bitter smile. "You shouldn't say that to me." "I know." I stepped forward, almost without realizing. "But it's the truth." We stood there, only a few feet apart, caught in the fragile space between restraint and surrender. Her hand trembled as she brushed a strand of hair from her face, and I wanted desperately to take that hand, to hold it, to ease the storm I saw in her eyes. But neither of us moved. Tears didn't fall, but they lived just behind her gaze, glistening in the faint light. "If she knew," she began, her voice breaking. I nodded, the guilt sharp in my chest. "I never meant for this to happen." "But it did," she said, her words trembling with both anger and longing. Silence stretched, raw and unbearable. We both knew what lived between us couldn't be erased, and yet neither of us could see a way forward without hurting someone who trusted us. And in that moment, standing inches apart, hearts pounding, it became clear. Whatever choice we made next would change everything. The truth, once spoken, changes everything. It lingers in the air, reshaping silence into something heavier, something that can't be carried lightly anymore. After that night in the kitchen, there was no going back. We didn't touch, we didn't kiss, and yet, I felt as though I had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The next morning, the world looked ordinary, almost cruelly so. The sun still rose, the house still filled with the smell of coffee. The woman I had been with still greeted me with the same warmth she always had. But beneath it all, I carried the knowledge of what had passed between her sister and me. The words, the looks, the trembling quiet that spoke louder than any confession ever could. I avoided her eyes at first, afraid of what I'd see there. But eventually we found ourselves alone again, if only for a moment. She didn't smile. She didn't try to cover the truth with small talk. Instead, she whispered, "We can't do this." Her words broke and healed me at the same time. They acknowledged everything I'd been feeling, everything I'd been too afraid to name. And yet, they also drew the line that love and loyalty demanded. I nodded because there was nothing else to do. Still, the pull between us refused to vanish. When she hugged me goodbye that afternoon, it was longer than it should have been. Not inappropriate, not scandalous, but enough. Enough for me to feel her heartbeat against my chest, steady at first, then quickening as if to echo my own. Enough for me to close my eyes and wonder what might have been, if life were different, if timing were kinder. And then she let go. In that release, there was both loss and mercy. Loss, because part of me already knew that I couldn't return to the simple certainty I once had with her sister. Mercy, because some things are too complicated, too dangerous to carry forward without breaking more than they build. I walked away that day with my chest aching, knowing I was leaving behind not just one love, but two truths. The the comfort of the woman I thought I loved, and the unspoken fire of the woman who had changed everything. Did we end up together? No, not in the way stories usually define it. But we didn't part as strangers either. There was a bond now, fragile and unspoken, that would stay with me long after our paths diverged. And maybe that's what love is sometimes, not possession, not permanence, but impact. The way one person can step into your life and alter the shape of your heart forever, even if you can't hold on to them. I thought I loved her, and I did. But it was her sister who showed me that love isn't always a single story, a single choice. Sometimes it's a fracture, a complication, a quiet truth you carry with you long after the moment has passed. And I will carry her with me, always. If this story touched you, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more slow-burn age gap romances, where every glance and every word tells a story worth remembering.